Our story begins at 7 a.m. Our protagonist ran 10 kilometers. By 12 noon, he had endured 500 head strikes. At 5 p.m., he completed the big 3 exercises, performing 10 reps per set across 10 sets. Exhausted from repeating this routine for 14 days, our protagonist decided to resign. He recalled someone asking him if he was going insane, to which he mused that perhaps going insane would have been better. As he read the system updates, a message appeared, announcing that the door to the end of the day was opening soon and the countdown until the end of days stood at 0 days, 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 5 seconds. The system also advised him to prepare for the end by recommending quests focused on strength exercises, cardio exercises, and learning kendo. The countdown then decreased to 2 seconds, then 1, until it hit 0. 15 days ago, all humans on Earth received a simultaneous message on their phones warning that at 1832 today in Dongno-gu, monsters would appear near Inwang Mountain, and that citizens in the area should evacuate immediately. The monsters then spread rapidly to Seoul, Incheon, Guri, Daegu, Daejeon, Guro, and many other cities. In a live video on Sakurella titled "The Monsters Have Really Appeared," a man, hiding behind a tree and pointing his camera at a goblin, whispered to his viewers that there was indeed a monster. However, his viewers believed it to be a hoax. The influencer asked his viewers if he should move closer since he had traveled all this way, which they agreed to without him noticing that the goblin had seen him. One viewer urged him to look behind, and soon, multiple comments flooded in with the same advice. He jokingly asked his viewers if they were messing with him and insisted that he was looking. But the creature wasn't moving. Unbeknownst to him, the goblin was directly behind him. When the goblin growled, the man screamed in panic, causing our protagonist, who was watching the live stream, to jolt in shock and remove his earphones. Irritated by the surprise, Lee Hoyoung, a 29-year-old, wondered why the video looked so realistic. He also noted the continuous disaster alert texts received that day, puzzling over the chaotic situation. Struggling to make a living was hard enough without tales of monsters, he thought, questioning who would believe such a thing. As he sighed over the recent surge of fake videos, he looked down to see a young monster trapped in chains, making pitiful sounds and begging for help with puppy-like tearful eyes. Despite his fear, Hoyoung pretended not to see the monster and muttered about a math teacher's visit that day, but the monster's loud sounds drew his attention once more. He shook in fear, wondering if the monster was pleading for his help. Even though it tried to appear cute and desperate, it was still too terrifying for him. He stared into its teary eyes, reminding himself that he was human and it was a monster. Furthermore, he wasn't the type to show compassion to a monster. Closing his eyes tightly, he opened them again to face the creature, telling himself he couldn't assist a monster, even with those sorrowful eyes looking back at him. However, his resolve wavered when the monster showed him a family picture, seemingly indicating it had a family waiting for it at home. This gesture made him forget all his previous reminders. Subsequently, the monster offered him a silver goblin's pill, which granted him unknown abilities upon consumption. He ended up helping the monster and even received a gift from it. Pondering the nature of the silver goblin's pill, he reached out to touch the system, but his hand passed through it as though it were a hologram. He scrutinized the pill, questioning who would dare consume something so suspicious. Just then, he heard the reporter shout urgent news. Unknown large buildings had materialized worldwide, resembling towers, and they had lost contact with the US Army that had entered one of these towers. The emergence of monsters and mysterious towers made him wonder if the apocalypse had indeed begun. Suddenly, the window of his room cracked and shattered as something outside exploded. Looking outside in confusion, he saw people running in panic. Others were stunned, staring at a massive tower that had surfaced underground, towering over the existing buildings. The reporter then frantically announced that a huge tower had also appeared in Korea. Clenching his fist, he gazed at the system once more as it displayed the effects of the silver goblin's pill. Unsure of his decision, he placed the pill in his mouth, thinking it was the only chance he'd ever get to do something as insane as this. Swallowing it, he felt a powerful surge coursing through every vein in his body. As the power spread, the system revealed that he had obtained the Sage status window, which would guide him with the highest rate of survival in his current predicament. A book suddenly appeared in his hands, causing him to stare at it in confusion. Upon opening it, he was shocked as it emitted a bright light. After reading the entire book, the system updated him. The door to the end of days was opening soon, with only 15 days remaining. It recommended a quest which he decided to follow, dedicating the next 15 days solely to exercising in preparation. However, when the system announced the opening of the end's door, he panicked, wondering if this was truly the end. When nothing drastic occurred, he mused that it was different from what he had envisioned. Then, the system handed him a blunt sword and initiated the tutorial. He completed the aptitude test, and based on the data analysis, he was assigned the most suitable class. The system declared him a combat swordsman and instructed him to open the status window for more details. Overwhelmed by the amount of information, he first checked his status window: health points at 100%, magic points at 10, class is combat swordsman level 1, skills including level 1 basic swordsmanship and sage status window, stamina at 7, strength at 11, agility at 7, sensitivity at 8, and remaining points at 0. Lifting his blunt sword proudly, he wondered if this meant things were truly starting now. He then noticed the system outlining the conditions to clear the test. He must either survive in the forest for 6 minutes or find an exit. He thought that if it was indeed a tutorial, it should allow time to acclimate to the game before it truly began. The system then appeared before him, and thanks to his Sage status window skill, it advised him to utilize all 60 minutes of the tutorial to eliminate as many monsters as possible, explaining that opting for the second objective might hinder his growth and was not recommended. He noticed that he could use the Sage status window there too and guessed that the Sage status window had prompted him to exercise because it knew this situation would occur. He thought it best not to choose to run from the forest because, according to the guide, he had to hunt monsters without noticing the bush moving. Suddenly, a monster emerged from the bush while the system announced that the tutorial was starting now. He was confused to see a small monster, a one-horned raccoon, and thought it was cuter than he had anticipated. However, he was shocked when it transformed into its monstrous form and leapt at him with sharp claws. He swung his sword forward and easily cut the raccoon in half. The system showed that he had killed the one-horned raccoon and obtained experience points. He thought it was pretty weak since it died from a strike of basic swordsmanship and surmised that maybe it was because it was a tutorial monster. He noticed that basic swordsmanship used 2 magic points and he only had 10, which meant he could only use basic swordsmanship 5 times. He realized he needed to conserve as much magic power as possible while hunting. After killing several level 1 raccoons, he gained more experience points, increasing his level to 2. The system then explained that he would receive points every time he leveled up, which he could use to increase his stats, leaving him with 2 remaining points. He was thrilled to level up and shouted that it was perfect timing because his magic was about to be depleted. Suddenly, the system made an error, leaving him shocked and confused. It then showed that it was adjusting his level, and he was back to level 1. It explained that this was due to the weight of knowledge, and as he had the Sage status window, he would level up slower compared to other players. His mouth fell open in shock, and he couldn't believe there was a penalty for having the Sage status window, and the level he had gained was taken from him, making him wonder when he could level up. He thought it was a ridiculous handicap and opened his status window to check, but he was confused to see that his stats could be upgraded. Shocked, he asked why he still had points and speculated that if his theory was correct, it wasn't a penalty but could be an overpowered bug-like ability. Suddenly, a raccoon appeared above him, ready to attack. He swung his sword and cut through the raccoon, gaining experience points and leveling up to 2. However, due to his Sage status window skill, he was reverted to level 1. But he smiled because he anticipated this and saw that his remaining points were still accumulating. He realized that the more he leveled up, the more experience he would need to earn for the next level, so he thought it might be easier to raise his stats this way rather than leveling up the normal way. He decided to try raising his stats and figured he had 4 choices. Knowing that strength and agility were the best choices for a combat swordsman, strength for stronger attacks and agility for increased speed and reflexes, he chose to invest all 4 points into his sensitivity. He continued to hunt and killed another one-horned raccoon. He noted that the one-horned raccoons weren't as strong as one would expect from a tutorial monster, and that he could defeat them easily even with default stats. The guide advised him to utilize the entire 60-minute tutorial to kill as many monsters as possible, making him realize that the challenge was how many one-horned raccoons he could find within the given time. When he increased his sensitivity to 20, he found it much easier to locate raccoons and felt like he could sense a kind of Kai at sensitivity 20. However, he was stunned when he felt a strong aura behind him, and the system announced that he had defeated all the monsters, thus activating a hidden quest. He turned and saw a huge, muscular one-horned raccoon behind him. His mission was to defeat the level 2 one-horned raccoon alpha. The raccoon alpha positioned its strong foot and leapt toward him. But fortunately, he jumped away in time, causing the raccoon alpha to slam into the tree behind him instead. He fell to the ground but managed to roll around to face the raccoon alpha. Noticing its speed, he wondered if this was the rhino-like monster and the boss, as he watched it struggle to free its horn from the tree. Once it freed itself, it faced him as he calmed himself down. He knew this raccoon was different from the others. It charged at him again, horn first. He waited for it to get a little closer, then slashed it with his sword. A system pop-up appeared, showing that he had defeated the boss and cleared the hidden quest, earning a reward of gold. He looked at the dead Raccoon Alpha, now realizing he was actually level 7. The system then showed that he had completed the tutorial, and he closed his eyes to relax, not expecting the hour to feel so long. When he slowly opened his eyes, thinking it was over, he was surprised to find himself in a room filled with people, making him wonder if he had been transported to a different location. The speaker in the room caught their attention, and someone welcomed them, announcing that they had successfully completed the tutorial. It was also explained that they were currently in the lobby of the tower, within the C2567 region. He wondered what the announcement meant and noticed 14 men and 11 women around him, making him curious if they too had finished the tutorial and been sent here. He also noticed that everyone was panicking, which seemed reasonable because the entire world had changed in just one day. He knew that if he hadn't known beforehand that the world was going to end, he would probably be panicking like them. He told himself to calm down and reassured himself that he would make it out alive. One of the women asked where they were, and to everyone's surprise, a rabbit with a human body replied that it was the Tower of the End. The woman looked down in confusion and was shocked. Kumkum, who was level 55, greeted everyone brightly and introduced itself as the cutie of the tower and the lower floor manager. The men were horrified because Kumkum had appeared out of nowhere. One man, suspecting it was just a child in a rabbit suit, asked Kumkum angrily if it was responsible for bringing them there. Kumkum sighed, guessing that this was a typical reaction. Then, someone told Kumkum that he had a question. He asked Kumkum what they were supposed to do now if it really was the end of the world, to which Kumkum responded with enthusiasm, stating it was a great question. Kumkum then informed everyone that there were 22 players and ominously told them they would be participating in a game with their lives at stake, leaving them stunned. Kumkum further explained that all humans on Earth were currently in that tower, and they would have to work together on each floor to climb the tower. He asked Kumkum if they could return to their normal lives once they reached the top of the tower, but Kumkum sweetly replied that he didn't know. Pressed further about the point of climbing the tower, Kumkum walked away, asking rhetorically if there was a need to search for meaning in things, and telling them that only death awaited those who did not climb. However, Kumkum paused as he walked away, remembering something, and warned them that quite a few people had already died in the tutorial. Upon hearing this, he asked himself in horror why he hadn't considered it and realized that, although it was just a tutorial, there were surely many who couldn't even manage that. He then thought of the oldest participants and the children, denying the thought in horror. But Kumkum regained their attention and asked if anyone was willing to try and kill him. Kumkum then explained that he needed to die to get home and there was a special reward for the one who helped him. Wondering if it was a trap, he knew Kumkum didn't look strong on the outside, but there was no way he could win against a level 55. He decided to stand back and watch for now, but then the Sage status window skill activated, guiding him to help the lower floor manager, Kumkum, get home. He wondered if it meant it was okay to attack the rabbit. He tightly gripped his sword, thinking that until now, it had never hurt to listen to the guide. But he pondered whether it was worth doing something so conspicuous and what he should do. But he was surprised when someone told Kumkum he would do it, and told Kumkum that if he wanted to die so badly, he should try killing him, making him realize that he was too late. Kumkum excitedly shouted that he would be able to go home. The man then grabbed his sword from his back, laughingly telling Kumkum not to regret it, and that he would kill him as painfully as possible. The man swung his sword at Kumkum, but as the sword neared Kumkum's head, Kumkum's fist, which had grown larger, appeared in the man's face, hitting him and saying he was too scary. The man's head was sent flying, causing his blood to splatter everywhere, and his head was thrown against the wall behind a woman who screamed in horror. Kumkum acted surprised, saying he accidentally counterattacked. The players were open-mouthed in shock and fear, while the lady next to the beheaded man screamed in fear and panic. The people ran away when they saw that the man had died, but he didn't move from his spot, wondering in horror what if it had been him who volunteered. Kumkum, who changed back into his cute form, awkwardly laughed and told everyone it was just a mistake. The guide once again popped up, instructing him to help the lower floor manager, Kumkum, get home, and Kumkum asked if there were any other volunteers, making him wonder if the guide was lying to him. Kumkum then sweetly asked them who wanted to help him get an early mark, but everyone was at the back, horrified, while he stood stunned, wondering why the guide was lying to him. At that moment, his Sage status window triggered and revealed that there are two types of Sage status windows. The first is the Sage's Eye, which gets triggered and allows him to look at the status windows of other people, and the second is the guide that occasionally sends him messages. However, because of that skill, he would level up slower compared to other players. He focused on the new Sage status window skill, Sage's Eyes, and couldn't believe there was another ability beside the Sage status window, but he wondered why it was appearing all of a sudden. He then looked at Kumkum and saw his status window but smiled when he understood what was happening. Kumkum sweetly told them that he wanted to go home and raised his hand. He then told Kumkum that he would do it, confident that the guide wasn't lying to him. He walked closer to Kumkum, who sweetly said that his name was Li Hoyang and he was level 1. But he just asked Kumkum if his level was important when he was doing a good deed. Kumkum replied that he supposed not. Kumkum then excitedly told him to send him home quickly, and he grabbed his sword in response, but the lady behind him stopped him and told him that it was too dangerous, as he had just seen someone die. The others agreed and told him not to do anything reckless, but he calmly told them that it was okay and he had a plan, leaving the lady confused. He then looked at Kumkum again while telling everyone that they would see something exciting and gripped his sword tightly with both hands. Kumkum stared at him for a moment, changed form swiftly, and launched an attack on him. He waited for Kumkum's huge fist to get closer while thinking there was something strange about what Kumkum had said. He was certain there were 25 people in that space, but Kumkum had just said 24, making him wonder if it was just a simple mistake, but he realized it was not, and the horror of facing a level 55 monster and fear that it could kill them were intentional. He also figured out that the reason Kumkum said the wrong number was because, but before his thought could finish, Kumkum hit him, which caused everyone to panic and shout in fear. However, he stood still, confusing Kumkum. He then slashed Kumkum's body, knowing that the reason was that there were only 24 people in there to begin with, and then they saw that the man who had been killed by Kumkum earlier was a human hologram created by Kumkum. Kumkum, a low-rank class moderator with 0 stats and a holographic form that disappears when damaged, tells him that he was pretty good. Before vanishing, Kumkum leaves them with a saying, "For those who have courage, may the odds be ever in their favor." Kumkum then disappeared, and when he looked back in relief, he saw Kumkum change into a ball. People looked at the one stat point he picked up, realizing it was fake. The man asked him how he knew about the hologram, and he replied that coincidentally, he saw the blood pass through Ki Yisal, and her face and clothes should have been covered in blood due to the proximity, which made him suspect it was all a show. However, he thought it would be better to make up an excuse instead. Suddenly, a man arrogantly called out to him, criticizing that it was a huge waste for him to have that stat point. The man, named Kim Seong, who was level 4, also told him that he just got lucky because if he had noticed, he would have stepped up. He asked Seong why he thought it would be a waste, and Seong replied that the fact he was still level 1 after they had completed the tutorial meant he was either extremely weak or he hadn't killed anything, so he would likely die quickly. For the sake of mankind, Seong was giving him the chance to yield the stat point to him. He looked at Seong, wondering about his arrogance and whether he was serious. He then consumed the stat point in front of Seong and told him that yielding wasn't a hobby of his. Seong furiously told him that for a bottom feeder, he was quite greedy and asked him if he was trying to save face because of his level. He remained silent, thinking that the wisest thing to do was to avoid people like Seong. But he wondered how long he would be able to keep it up. Fortunately, the announcer announced that from now on, their starting gold would be given out and explained that they could use the gold in the shop. An additional gold would be given in accordance with the number of monsters they had hunted in the tutorial. Seong told him to count himself lucky, and the announcer proceeded by telling them that in that area, the highest amount of starting gold a player had was 7,400 gold. The people were shocked to hear it and couldn't believe that one of them had that much. Seong, who received 1,300 gold, cursed in frustration and shouted that he would have performed better if he had known what was at stake. Level 4 Kim Junseong, who received 1,500 gold, replied that he didn't know who came in first, but they must be amazing. On the other hand, the recipient of the 7,400 gold was the level 1, Li Hoyang, who chose not to reveal it since one person was already envious over a mere stat point. The system announced that the shop was opening, and he knew there were 3 major ways to use gold: buying items, leveling up skills, or increasing stats. He increased his strength by 9, costing 900 gold, boosted his stamina by 6 for 600 gold, and enhanced his agility by 13 for 1,300 gold, making all his stats 20 and leaving him with 4,600 gold. Seong, visibly frustrated, questioned why leveling up skills was so expensive, prompting him to realize he should also upgrade his basic swordsmanship, which cost 1,500 gold. He then purchased clothes for 100 gold, noting that he couldn't keep wearing his gym uniform. Someone then called him from behind, and he turned to see Ki Yisal, who was level 3, asking for advice. He questioned why she was seeking advice from a level 1. She replied that, his level aside, she was very impressed by his bravery. He noticed that Yisal was a healer with the healing hands skill. Her stamina was 4, her strength and agility were 7, her sensitivity was 15, she had no remaining points, and she had 800 gold left. He asked her how much gold she currently had, and she confirmed it was 800 gold, proving her honesty and reminding him that he needed to conceal the fact that he was using a cheat key. He then asked if she liked exercising, to which she replied that she didn't mind walking. He advised that if so, her stamina stat was likely not very robust, which she agreed with. He explained that if she lacked stamina, she should invest in it because she couldn't use items effectively despite the gold she had spent. She agreed to follow his advice and thanked him. The announcer then informed them that the first floor mission would commence soon and that they should form their own 3-man parties. Additionally, players without a party would be put into a random one, and they were given 30 minutes to team up. He had anticipated a group mission, but he didn't expect it to come so soon. Junseong suggested that they share their classes since they could see each other's levels. Following Junseong's suggestion, they started to reveal their classes, and people began forming teams with their preferred players. Yaisal told him that if he was willing, she would like to team up with him. With Ki Yaisal as his first party member, he had no reason to refuse when a healer asked to join him. However, the responses from everyone else were the same. They apologized and told him they would think about it before joining his party. He couldn't believe they hesitated even though he had a healer and guessed that maybe they were put off by him, but he admitted that a level 1 combat swordsman wasn't very appealing. He then noticed that since players who were level 4 seemed very relaxed, everyone had already formed their parties and only a few were left. Then the announcer declared that 30 minutes were up and incomplete parties would now be filled randomly. After that, the announcer informed them that the first floor mission would commence, and they all teleported into a forest. Seong frustratingly said that he was so unlucky and expressed disbelief that he was in a party with that bottom feeder. He was also surprised that Seong, a level 4, was less popular than him and wondered if cooperation with Seong was even possible. Resolving himself to the situation, he looked up to the bright sky and swore that he would do anything to survive there. The system then showed them that their mission was to annihilate the Kobold tribe within a 12-hour time limit. Seong announced that he would wipe out the Kobold tribe himself and told the others not to get in his way. He reminded Seong that it was a team mission, but Seong dismissively called him a loser and asked why he had so much to say when he was merely riding on his coattails. Sighing, he agreed and told Seong he'd take a ride on his coattails to see how good it was, deciding to listen to Seong for now. As Seong continued walking, Seong asked why he would bother rebelling if he was just going to ride his coattails anyway, and told him he should only pull himself together when his life is threatened. But he thanked Seong for his concern, leaving Yaisal silent and worriedly wondering if their party would be okay. Irritated by the environment, Seong cursed about the abundance of bugs, but he knew they needed to complete their mission without trouble, so he restrained his anger. Approaching the tribe, he noticed the large number of insects due to their mountainous location, and was puzzled by something he saw. Just then, Yaisal called to him, asking if she was right to think that the kobold monster must be strong. He replied that it might be stronger than a one-horned raccoon, but since they were still on level 1, it should be manageable. He then advised her that they should still be on their guard because they were, after all, still in the Tower of the End, to which she cheerfully agreed. A moment later, they saw a creature with a huge build, strong 6-pack abs, and muscular legs. He stared at it for a moment and realized it was a level 5 kobold, far different from the raccoons. They were hiding behind trees and bushes when Yaisal mentioned that the kobold was obviously much stronger and asked him what they should do. He suggested checking the surroundings first since there could be more kobolds around. However, Seong suddenly emerged from hiding and confronted the confused kobold, punching it in the face while shouting that he was a coward for remaining at level 1. Both were shocked by Seong's actions, but Seong was proud of what he had done. The kobold growled at Seong in anger, but Seong merely told it that it was just holding out. Seong then continued to punch the kobold relentlessly. He couldn't believe that Seong had charged in so brazenly, and he hadn't expected Seong to be that stubborn. Yaisal came out from hiding and shouted to Seong, who was still fighting with the kobold, that she would help too. He was relieved that he hadn't sensed any other kobolds around yet and watched Seong, who had a strength of 24, damage the kobold with hits of 15, 20, and 17 while Yaisal assisted him. He admitted that Seong was certainly proving his level's worth, and with Yaisal's help, Seong might even be able to take down the kobold alone. However, he wondered why the damage dealt was so low compared to Seong's strength and whether the kobold had some other weakness. The Sage status window guide then popped up, showing him that kobolds are passive monsters and will not attack unless provoked, making him realize that Seong had stirred the hornet's nest unnecessarily. He then scrolled down the system window to read more, trying to stay positive, but was shocked by the next guide. Meanwhile, Seong was frustrated because he couldn't kill the kobold, which triggered his stone fist. When he punched with it, the kobold dodged in time, and he hit a tree instead. The tree then fell, striking a kobold resting behind it. A level 6 kobold peeked back at them angrily, causing him to curse in fear. It then threw the tree aside and charged toward them. Seong felt he was in big trouble and wondered what Hoyoung was doing, as he wasn't helping at all. When he looked to where Hoyoung was hiding, he noticed Hoyoung had disappeared, making him wonder if Hoyoung had really run away. The kobold raised its wooden club to attack Seong, but fortunately, Yisol slashed at the kobold just in time to divert its attention and shouted to Seong that it was dangerous. However, she then tripped on a stone and slammed to the ground. She felt the kobold behind her and, upon peeking back, was shocked to see the kobold launching its club at her. Suddenly, something appeared above the kobold, and Hoyoung slashed the fruit with his sword, then attacked the kobold with it. The kobold was shocked as its skin began to bubble and the poison spread rapidly through its body until it exploded. He dropped to the ground, and the system confirmed that he had eliminated the level 6 kobold. Seong, confused and stuttering, called him a loser, and Yisol was relieved when she called his name. He realized that while the bugs had eaten all the fruit, the kobolds hadn't touched any, leading him to suspect something was amiss. He then figured out that the fruit was a poisonous apple and remembered that the guide showed kobolds were vulnerable to poison. He knew then that gathering poison from the mountains and using it was the key to completing their level 1 mission. Seong clenched his teeth in anger. Behind him, he was helping Yisol stand up, asking her if she was okay, to which she replied affirmatively. He told her that he hadn't expected another kobold to be drawn there by the aggro, noting it could have been dangerous had he been a bit late. However, she assured him that he arrived just in time and thanked him because they made it. She then asked him where he was going, and just as he was about to reply, Seong called him a loser and accused him of being a mere free rider. Seong shouted that he had been hiding in a corner when it was actually dangerous, but after he landed a few hits on the kobolds, he just swooped in and stole the final hit. Seong then walked away, muttering that he was an unethical bastard. He knew it when he saw him greedily consuming the stat points, making him wonder what the hell Seong was ranting about and if Seong was losing his mind. He sighed, realizing that Seong's inability to read the room meant he was going to have an even harder time. A moment later, they arrived at the kobold village. Seong was striking another kobold, reminding himself that he was Kim Seong, a renowned name in the punching scene, and that a lowly monster could never stop him, even as the kobolds hit him in the face, making him cough up blood. He launched his fist at one of the kobolds, but then he saw Yisol and Hoyoung effortlessly eliminating another kobold, making him curse in frustration. He then peeked back at Yisol and Hoyoung, who were happily dispatching kobolds as if they were merely level 1, wondering how they were managing it so easily. One of the kobolds then struck him in the head, causing him to slam to the ground. The kobolds continuously stepped on him, causing immense pain, and he cried while covering his head and begging for someone to help. His eyes, full of tears, opened when the kobolds stopped stepping on him, and he saw the slashed kobolds explode. Shocked, he looked up and saw Hoyoung offering him a hand, telling Seong that he took over the coattails ride in his place for a bit, and asked how the ride was. Seong didn't answer for a moment, then cried in happiness like a child. He then called him his big brother, leaving him and Yisol shocked in disbelief. They then cleared the mission. A moment later, they returned to the lobby. Seong was silent, pondering what he had done, and remembered bowing and swearing to Hoyoung that he would serve him. He couldn't believe he had called a level 2 newbie sir and looked at Hoyoung with anger while Yisol congratulated Hoyoung for leveling up. Seong feared it was over for him if word got out, but as a man of his word, he couldn't go back on his promise. Seong shook in fear, making him wonder if Seong needed to use the restroom or something. Yisol noted that it seemed no one else was there yet and asked if they were the first ones back. He replied that it looked like they had cleared faster than others because they had managed to find the kobold's weakness. Seong wondered if they really were in first place, but Yisol assured him it wasn't just luck, it was all thanks to his observational skills, as she would never have thought of using poison. He replied that without her support, it would have been much harder, and he felt like a fraud for lying. A moment later, other teams began returning to the lobby, and he noted that it looked like Junseong and Junho's party were among them as she greeted them, praising their good work. He suspected that these parties must have found the poisonous apples too and wondered if the other parties had made it back safely. Eventually, the lobby portal opened and 2 men stumbled out, collapsing to the ground from exhaustion and disbelief that they had survived. Yisol asked them about the third person in their party, but one of the men cried and replied that it was just the 2 of them now, remembering how their other party member had been killed by a kobold. The announcer then declared that the first level mission had been completed by all parties, which left the heartbroken man in shock. Yisol called out to the announcer, concerned that someone hadn't returned yet, but the announcer replied that a total of 6 parties had returned alive and 8 players had failed to return, leaving him shocked. He had expected it to be difficult for everyone to make it back alive, but the reality that 8 people were already dead made him wonder how many more would die before they reached the top. The announcer then announced that the calculations for the level 1 mission were to begin. The parties who made it back intact and the party that cleared the first level the fastest would each receive 1,000 gold. He saw that he had earned 2,000 gold for both bonuses and thought it was a bit lacking compared to the tutorial, but he knew that gold was crucial for his future survival, so he resolved to save as much as he could. He was surprised when someone asked which party had finished first. Glancing at the second party, he guessed that it was time to reveal it, as the party that returned second seemed to already know. He was about to raise his hand to admit it when Seong proudly shouted that it was their party and arrogantly declared it an obvious result, advising the others not to feel too sad. The players couldn't believe they had secured first place, but when they reacted with disbelief, Seong challenged them, asking if they were upset that his party had won, to which they fearfully replied that wasn't what they meant. He smiled, guessing that Seong had forgotten how the kobolds had beaten him, but it was fine since it diverted attention away from himself. However, players whispered about him, noting that he got first place while only being level 2, gained 2,000 gold without much effort, and wondered aloud if he felt bad for being carried, making him realize that the attention was still on him. Gysol was about to clarify that he was the one who had secured their victory, but he stopped her and said it was okay because they weren't going to listen anyway. She tried to disagree, but he told her he'd have to prove it to them. Suddenly, someone clapped their hands to get everyone's attention, and Junseong, who had risen to level 8, urged everyone to calm down as they needed to focus on survival. Kim Junseong, an archer and one of the highest level players in the region, together with Seo Junho, a level 8 combat swordsman, encouraged everyone to press on for the sake of those who had passed away. The crowd agreed, shouting that they shouldn't wallow but instead gather their spirits, which lifted everyone's morale. But then, the flame in the lobby extinguished and morphed into a red flame tinged with purple power that spread inside the lobby. The announcer's warning about the change made everyone panicky, asking what was happening and why the torch's flame had changed color. The announcer then informed them that the survival rate of the first level of Regency 2567 was below average, triggering a penalty mission and announcing that a death mission would soon begin. This left everyone confused. The announcer instructed them to mentally choose one candidate, explaining that the player with the most votes would undertake the death mission. They were given 5 minutes to vote, and if they did not choose someone, they would automatically vote for themselves. The announcer also warned them that being voted for meant death. The crowd looked around in horror. Gysol shouted to everyone that if they all voted for themselves, then no one would have to undertake the death mission. However, one of the men countered her, asking what would happen if they all ended up having to do it. Another woman shouted that it wasn't the time for arguments because time was still ticking down. As the clock hit the last minute, one of the ladies pointed at him, and they all saw Seo Junho casting his vote for him. Gysol approached him worriedly, asking Junho if it wasn't too cruel to vote for someone when anonymity hadn't been assured. Junho stutteringly apologized and explained that they needed to make a choice. He replied that he had expected it given the atmosphere but was still taken aback because, after all, he didn't want to die. Junho clenched his lips in response. Gysol argued that it wasn't too late and that if everyone voted for themselves and Hoyoung voted for Junho, it would be fine. However, he told Gysol that it wouldn't work, citing Lee Yicheol's point that they didn't know if that strategy would work and that trust was already broken. As time dwindled, the votes above his head increased one by one. He knew there were multiple reasons for this, but the most significant was his low level. It dawned on him that they had lost the societal notion that the strong should protect the weak. Gysol yelled at the players, calling them cruel and questioning how they could do this to someone. A man retorted, asking what else they were supposed to do, as he would die if he didn't vote. He noticed the facade of civility crumbling, with one woman arrogantly stating that Hoyoung would have died anyway given his level. As the timer hit the last second, Seong teasingly apologized and cast his vote for him, a cruel reminder that they truly were in the world of the end. The announcer declared that all votes had been cast, and a portal opened in front of him. They all stared at the portal, wondering if it was real, and Gysol, in tears, worriedly called out his name. Meanwhile, Seong laughed loudly, proclaiming that his problem was solved with Hoyoung gone, and boasted that he was a genius. He walked towards the portal, aware that he was the sacrificial lamb and the altar was set, with faces of guilt and relief behind him. Yet, he knew he had no choice but to ascend Calvary, except at the top of Calvary wasn't death but a potential reward. As he stepped through the portal, he smiled, anticipating the delightful treat that awaited him. When he entered the portal, the lobby's torch flared back to life, and Junseong approached Gysol. He asked her if she was feeling alright and told her that, although their time together was short, they were still companions who had watched each other's backs. For him, it felt regrettable to part ways like this. However, Seong interrupted, questioning what was regrettable when they got what they deserved, which infuriated Gysol. Junseong then challenged Seong, asking what he meant by that. Seong asked if they couldn't tell just by looking at Hoyoung's level, claiming that all Hoyoung had done was try to benefit from him while he carried the group. Yisol demanded to know what Seong was implying, asserting that it was Hoyoung's abilities that had got them through the mission. Seong retorted loudly, questioning what abilities she was referring to, and shouted that Hoyoung had merely gotten lucky with his scheming and had taken the final blow when the opportunity presented itself. Yisol angrily asked Seong if he was sure that Hoyoung hadn't saved him from near death, leaving Seong speechless as he recalled how Hoyoung had killed the kobolds attacking him. He then pondered whether Hoyoung possessed a skill that allowed him to alter the level he displayed. Fearfully, Seong wondered if he was right that Hoyoung wouldn't make it back alive. Junseong told them that he personally hoped Hoyoung was as competent as Yisol believed, because that way, Hoyoung would at least have a slight chance of returning. Yisol remembered Hoyoung promising to let them see for themselves. She wiped away her tears and replied that she believed in Hoyoung, confident that he would return safely, which made Junseong smile and express his agreement. Meanwhile, inside the portal, Hoyoung returned to the destroyed tribe and wondered if the dead kobolds in front of him were the same ones from before. He felt uneasy but decided to check his guide, which told him that the chance of clearing the mission was very high, and that a significant reward awaited him. Before he entered, he had considered voting for himself if things turned sour, but he was relieved that everything seemed to be going his way. Still, he was frustrated that even though it was already decided, Seong had tried to take the final blow. The system then indicated that the kobold tribe's hunting group was returning, and the kobolds were furious to see their tribe destroyed. He looked back and saw a huge kobold behind the others. The system then warned him that the death mission was starting, and his objective was to kill the chieftain and the hunting group, who were enraged by the death of their tribesmen. The level 12 kobold chieftain screamed in anger, and the hunting kobolds rushed towards him. The guide showed that the kobold chieftain was the dungeon's boss monster and, like the other kobolds, was weak to poison. He squeezed the apple poison onto his sword, knowing that facing a level 12 boss monster along with other kobolds was nearly an impossible challenge and that anyone else might have resigned to their fate. One of the kobolds launched its spear at him, but he easily dodged it, swung his poisoned sword, and activated his level 2 basic swordsmanship, which cut down the multiple kobolds near him in just one swift swing. He sighed in relief after easily dispatching the hunter kobolds, but then the chieftain growled in anger. Nonetheless, he charged at it with his sword, shouting that they were about to see what the boss monster of a death mission was like. He attacked the chieftain, but it skillfully blocked his sword with its own. He noticed that it minimized the impact by pulling back at the time of contact, a skill he hadn't expected from a monster, even in a death mission boss. Suddenly, the chieftain turned and ran away swiftly, leaving him surprised and wondering if it was merely fleeing. He chased after it and, feeling a mix of disappointment and determination, attacked it from behind, pondering how it could call itself a boss monster. He thought the battle would soon be over and considered whether this was like a bonus stage that anyone reaching this point could clear. As he raised his sword for a final, forceful slash at the chieftain's back, he noticed his sword shake and the chieftain stop running. Confused, he looked at the chieftain, who was now staring upward. Following its gaze, he too looked up and saw a full red moon in the sky. Suddenly, the chieftain's eyes turned red and, with a swift motion, it slashed at his shoulder with its sword. Meanwhile, in the lobby, Seong, smiling, tells everyone that since there's nothing they can do for someone who is already dead, he, Kim Seong, will carry them through the rest of the floors. However, they ignore him and continue praying, which angers him. He angrily questions whether they understand what death is and why they are even praying for Hoyoung when it's clear that Hoyoung is already dead. This shocks Yisol, who shouts back at Seong in anger, telling him that even in such dire circumstances, he should at least have some conscience. She then demands to know what Seong would do if Hoyoung were to return safely, but Seong dismissively replies that Hoyoung would never make it back alive. Yisol challenges Seong, asking if he really intends to maintain this attitude until the end, to which Seong retorts, asking if he said something wrong. He fails to notice the portal opening, but then someone else inquires if it is the portal, causing Yisol to stop mid-sentence and look up, where she sees Hoyoung emerging from the portal. Junseong is stunned and surprised, while Junho is overjoyed to see him. The slash on Hoyoung's face and the severe injury on his shoulder are healed as he enters the lobby. The announcer then proclaims that the player who participated in the death mission has returned alive. Hoyoung, with a smile, tells them that he's back. Before that moment, the guide had warned him to be cautious, as the abilities of the kobold chieftain would increase when its eyes turned red. He was already injured when the guide issued the warning. He stepped back and sat down, knowing he needed to stop the bleeding as his health dropped to 32%. The chieftain charged toward him, its health steadily decreasing by 10. He stared at the rampaging demon, realizing he needed just one good hit, but unsure how to achieve it. Panic set in as the chieftain closed the distance and launched its sword to finish him off, but he jumped away just in time to avoid the strike. He looked back and couldn't believe the chieftain had punched a hole through the tree as if it were soft tofu. It was then he had an epiphany. While a sword might not be able to cut through a wall, a nail could pierce it, and he might have been subconsciously thinking of a sword only as a slashing weapon. He bent down and waited for the chieftain to strike again, planning to use its momentum against it by adding his own weight to the countermove. The chieftain positioned its feet, leaped higher, and swung its sword back to gain force. As it launched the sword toward him, he focused all his energy on one point and stabbed his sword into the chieftain's shoulder, creating a huge hole. He smiled, realizing his maneuver worked, and as a result, a stabbing skill was added to his level 2 basic swordsmanship. The system then indicated that he had cleared the death mission. This was when Yisol rushed toward him, surprised, and just as Yisol was about to embrace him in happiness, Seong pushed her aside, causing her to fall hard to the floor, roll around from the force, and slam into a wall. Confused, she looked up and saw Seong hugging Hoyoung. Seong shouted that he had always had faith he'd make it back and called him his big brother. Seong also shouted that a mere death mission could never stop his big brother Hoyoung, the strongest in the universe. Hoyoung clenched his fist, struggling to contain his anger and wishing he could just beat Seong. But then someone called out from his side. Lee Byung-cheol asked him if he had really cleared the death mission. Byung-cheol expressed his relief at seeing Hoyoung safe but pointed out that although clearing the mission should have earned a lot of experience points, Hoyoung's level hadn't changed. Other players began to notice and speculated whether it was similar to the incident with the rabbit mod, which had amounted to nothing. Hoyoung clenched his teeth in frustration, thinking he had grown accustomed to such setbacks, but it seemed the world still wanted the weak to remain weak. He then recalled a childhood memory of scoring perfectly on a test, only for his classmates to accuse him of cheating because, as an orphan who didn't attend an academy, there was no way he could achieve top marks. Now, he heard players suggesting he had just hidden somewhere and bided his time before emerging, as if he had been concealed in a pit, asserting that there was no way he could complete it with his level. They acted as if they couldn't allow even a worm to wriggle about, they wanted to step on it and crush it. He knew well enough that prejudiced people don't change their views easily, but he also knew what he needed to do. Suddenly, someone shouted for everyone to stop speaking so thoughtlessly. Yisol asked why they continued to doubt Hoyoung and whether he hadn't already proven that he survived the death mission. She stood next to him, shouting that they didn't know anything. Then Seong, from his other side, stepped forward and agreed that Yisol was right. He also shouted that not only had they failed to hold a party to celebrate the glorious return of his big brother Hoyoung, the strongest in the universe, but they had even dared to spoil the mood. Seong then flexed his muscles at them, questioning if they had lost their minds. To Hoyoung, however, Seong sounded the craziest. Seeing Yisol stand up for him and Seong argue with the others was somewhat reassuring. But he knew he needed everyone's cooperation to survive in the tower. If he wanted to ensure that, he had to show them something convincing. Thus, he called for everyone's attention and announced that he needed to show them something. He then displayed the Indomitable Sword, a rare item with an attack power bonus of 15%. Ichiol, surprised, asked if that wasn't essentially a cheat key. Jian remarked that no information even came up for his old long sword. Junseong admitted he was surprised Hoyoung had kept the poisoned apple with him and agreed with Yisol that he was truly extraordinary, to which Hoyoung modestly replied that he was just lucky. Junseong pointed out that such a great item as a reward was far more valuable than some experience points for their survival. Hoyoung then questioned Junseong, echoing his words about their survival, and reminded them that they seemed to have forgotten how they had nearly driven him to his death. The players, stunned, looked away in embarrassment. Junho, biting his lip shakily, admitted to Hoyoung that he was right. He confessed that he had justified his actions by thinking it couldn't be helped. But ultimately, it was pure selfishness, thinking it was fine as long as it wasn't him. Even though they knew that voting for Hoyoung, the one with the lowest level, was effectively targeting him, they threw him into a deadly situation so they could save themselves. Junho then bowed deeply and sincerely apologized, tearfully expressing his relief that Hoyoung had returned alive. While the others looked away guiltily, Seo Yoonjin questioned Junho, asking why he had to go so far when someone had to go anyway, and Hoyoung even returned with a rare item, implying it all turned out well. Junho angrily confronted Yoonjin, asking how she could say such a thing. He questioned if she felt no guilt at all, but she retorted that he had no right to say that when he had voted for Hoyoung before everyone else. Junho started to explain, but Hoyoung interrupted, telling everyone that his reason for bringing this up wasn't to scold them but to prevent such actions from happening again. He explained that they must have already sensed it during the death mission voting, that the tower was trying to divide them. He elaborated that it was provoking distrust among them, causing conflicts, and probably reveling in sending them on a path to ruin. The players fell silent upon hearing this, and Hoyoung told them that this is why he believes his return from the death mission alive was an opportunity. He had proved that their actions could defy the tower's intentions. Junseong asked him if he had a plan for the future, to which he replied that he would search for ways to ensure the survival of as many people as possible while continuing to climb the tower. He declared that they would climb higher and higher, and someday, when they reached the end, they would reclaim their lives. As all the people looked up with him, Yaisal added that to achieve this, everyone there would need to join hands. He agreed with Yaisal, while behind him, Junho thought to himself that he was a generous man and they shouldn't have judged him based on something as trivial as his level. Suddenly, Kumkum appeared, announcing that it was unfortunate because the next mission was a survival game. They all reacted with horror upon seeing Kumkum and questioned why he was there again and whether he would be awarding stat points this time too. He asked Kumkum if he was correct in assuming what he meant by a survival mission, to which Kumkum confirmed that he was indeed quick to understand. Kumkum then seriously informed them that the mission for level 2 would involve the 15 players present and that it would be a battle royale. However, he sweetly added that since it was a lower level, it was just a mild taste of what was to come, so they should cheer up. Kumkum went on to explain the rules. In the level 2 mission, there would be 16 players and 16 doppelgangers, making a total of 32 participants. The objective was to eliminate all the doppelgangers. He also explained that the doppelgangers would not only possess the same stats but also the same memories as the players, making it challenging. The most critical rule, he noted, was that there was no reward for killing a doppelganger, but if a player killed another player, they could obtain stat points and gold. Essentially, the mission could be an opportunity, but the players cursed Kumkum, accusing him of essentially telling them to kill each other. Kumkum continued, stating that for every 30 minutes without a kill, everyone would be immediately summoned to the lobby and face a huge disaster. As he spoke, a portal opened, and they all saw something emerge. A huge hand with sharp claws reached out, followed by an unknown, massive monster peeking out at them. He was stunned, staring at the monster in anger, while Yaisal called out to him and Junho told him to get out of the way. But he just stood there, glaring at the monster, wondering if they were really expected to fight it. Suddenly, it punched, causing the ground to shatter. Fortunately, he jumped away with Yaisal and Junho just in time. Looking back, he saw it raising its fist, making him realize that it was literally a disaster. Yeongcheol, who was shaking on the ground with others, stutteringly asked if it was real, and the lady questioned how they were supposed to fight it when they had barely passed the first floor. He knew the situation was dire because everyone had fallen into panic. The monster launched its fist again at the man who was on the floor in shock and couldn't move, but fortunately, he grabbed the man away just in time to save him. The man stutteringly thanked him, but he just frustratingly asked what on earth it was doing when the second floor mission hadn't even started yet. They then heard Kumkum on the floor acting scared, and he remembered Kumkum telling them a moment ago that if there were no kills within every 30 minutes, everyone would be immediately summoned to the lobby and would face a huge disaster. This made him wonder if it was putting on a show to get them to be serious about the mission and realize that it was just a taste of how things would be, and it was not actually trying to harm them. However, he was shocked when he heard players being thrown behind him. Junseong released his arrows at the monster and Seong threw a huge piece of rock at it. Their attacks hit its hand, but it didn't even flinch. Junseong told them that nothing was happening no matter how many times he fired arrows at it, and Seong cursed in response. He wondered if it wasn't just for show and if it was really trying to kill them. Yaisal, who was treating the other players, told him that she didn't have any more mana. He noticed that no one had died so far, but he knew that wouldn't be the case for long. The monster launched its fist toward them, making Junho shout that it was coming again. He shouted to them to stand back and positioned his sword, knowing that there was no time to be concerned about what others thought. Junho shouted to him that he had to get away, but he launched his sword to meet the monster's fist, knowing that if he couldn't stop it then everyone would die. With the synergy between the indomitable sword and the stab, he guessed that it might have some effect. He then forcefully swung his sword up with all his might and successfully stabbed it. The monster then disappeared, leaving every single player stunned in shock, and he was confused about what was happening too. The players couldn't believe it at first, but then they cheered in victory and praised him, though he was just confused, looking at his sword and wondering if it was that strong. He couldn't believe it because it was completely different from anything he had experienced so far. Then, the system popped up, indicating that he would be in an exhausted state for 3 minutes due to using strength beyond his limits. His vision slowly blurred, and he collapsed while thinking that he was in serious trouble. 3 minutes later, he opened his eyes upon hearing people calling his name, and the system notified him that his exhausted state had been lifted. Yaisal happily called out to him, and Junseong asked if he was awake now. Junho told him that he was really moved and couldn't believe how humble he had acted despite being so strong. He even joked that the fainting act was perfect, leaving him confused. He asked them what on earth had happened and what had become of the huge disaster. Kumkum then cheerfully replied that it had been sent back and that this round was just meant to give them a taste of things, shocking him as he realized that it was true. Kumkum went on to say that he guessed it wasn't very exciting and remarked that everyone was being too friendly with each other despite the recent peril. As Kumkum walked closer, he ominously reminded them that the requirement for a kill every 30 minutes meant that the people standing next to them might be the ones to kill them. Everyone was shocked upon hearing this and looked at each other, but Kumkum merely opened a portal and announced that he had passed on the message, then took his leave. Kumkum disappeared, leaving them all stunned. He clenched his teeth in anger, unable to believe how obvious its intentions had been, making him wonder if there was nothing they could do about it. Moments later, as everyone panicked, Junho asked if he was right in thinking that if they couldn't find the doppelgangers, they would need to kill each other. Ichial shouted that they needed to find a way to deal with it quickly, and someone suggested putting a mark on each of them. But Ichial reminded them that the doppelgangers shared their memories. He then called everyone to get their attention and announced that he had a plan in mind. Gaisal asked him what it was, and he stood up, replying that during the mission, he alone would do the killing, leaving everyone shocked. He then explained that all of them should do nothing and gather at the highest place on the second floor. He also instructed them that if anyone other than him took action, they should consider that person a doppelganger and work together to defeat it. On Secheng, a level 9 former Special Forces member and survival specialist, asked him if that was indeed his plan. Yunjin acknowledged that he was pretty good despite being low-leveled, but questioned why they should obediently follow his plan. In response, he reminded them of Kumkum's recent words, "There is no reward for a player who kills a doppelganger, but if a player kills another player, they can obtain stat points and gold." Kumkum had also warned them that the people standing next to them might be the ones to kill them. He explained that while the instructions asked them to fight the doppelgangers, the tower's true intention was for them to kill each other. He stated that he didn't want to be manipulated by the tower any longer, believing his strategy was the best solution. Yunjin skeptically asked how it was the best. However, Junseong raised his hand, agreeing with him, and told everyone that this approach would minimize the damage done to them as much as possible. Junseong then earnestly asked if entrusting him with this role meant he had a way to differentiate who was a doppelganger. He simply smiled, indicating he did have a method. Later, on the second floor, the mission required killing at least one person within 30 minutes, with the current count at 16 players and 16 doppelgangers. Seong, while walking in the forest, expressed his frustration about Hoyoung's plan to gather at the top without doing anything, noting how much he disliked climbing mountains. Suddenly, he stopped and hid behind a tree when he heard someone approaching. Ready to defend himself, Seong prepared his fist as someone called his name. The person teasingly remarked that Seong, being such a large man, shouldn't think he could hide behind a tree. Seong emerged, playfully blowing a kiss and admitting he thought the other was a doppelganger. However, the moment turned grim as the other man slashed Seong in half, effortlessly killing him, with Seong's blood splattering across his face. Before that, he was in the forest, looking at his system and reading the guide. It informed him that the first among the players to reach a certain stat level and sensitivity would receive the skill Impeccable Sense as a reward for being the first to attain that achievement. This skill would assist in identifying doppelgangers. He admitted that he had actually become a little scared after claiming he was confident in differentiating who was a doppelganger. But just then, it appeared perfect timing. He began to press his sensitivity to increase it, each press costing 100 gold, which made him worry about how many stats he needed to invest in it. Soon, the system notified him that he was the first to achieve a stat level of 50 in sensitivity, and thus he obtained Impeccable Senses. The system explained that his 5 senses would be extremely developed, and he would be able to obtain detailed information about a person as long as they were within a certain radius of him. He was thrilled that he finally got the skill after spending about half of his gold, noticing that it felt like his whole world had an improved filter of senses applied to it. Suddenly, he heard someone mumbling and recognized the voice. Utilizing his new skill, he looked up and saw Seong complaining while walking. He couldn't believe that he could hear Seong clearly despite being 500 meters away, and noticed that Seong had a lot to complain about. But then, a dark air hit his nose, making him cover it and wonder why there was suddenly such a bad stench. When he looked at Seong again, he saw him change form, realizing it was a doppelganger. That is when he killed Seong's doppelganger. He was surprised that it acted like the real thing up until the moment it died, making him feel bad for killing it. He then looked up at the mountain, hoping that now that he had confirmed his ability to differentiate doppelgangers, the rest were following his instructions. He was grateful to Junseong for agreeing with him and felt that it seemed everyone had agreed to follow the plan. However, he knew that there was no telling what could happen in real time and hoped nothing adverse would occur until the players reached a high place on the map. Suddenly, a system pop-up showed that a player had died, stunning him with shock. The system updated the count to 15 players and 15 doppelgangers. He couldn't believe that a player had already died, making him wonder if the doppelgangers had started to kill people or if a player had done it, and whether Seong had caused trouble. He clenched his teeth tightly, knowing there was no way to figure out what had happened right now. He then jumped up and ran at speed, knowing he needed to find the killer as quickly as possible. He climbed up to the tallest tree and hid behind it, cursing because while he had killed another doppelganger, another player had also been killed. He looked around, wondering where the killer could be. He then felt someone behind him, and immediately turned to see the doppelganger standing beside the dead player. Furious, he thought he had found it and swiftly jumped down from the tree to confront the doppelganger, which then transformed into Yongwoo and acted scared. Despite its act, he slashed it in half, and the system confirmed that a doppelganger had died. He had suspected his doppelganger might have been the killer, but this was different from what he had expected. He was relieved that he had eliminated it before it could cause more damage. He then looked at the dead body of Lee Byung-cheol and told his soul to rest in peace, but as he drew closer to Byung-cheol's body, he noticed something strange. Yongwoo's doppelganger's weapon was a dull long sword, yet the mark on Byung-cheol's body wasn't caused by a sword. He looked up to find the kind of wound was caused by an arrow, then he saw Junseong aiming an arrow at him. He hid behind the tree, unable to believe there was another culprit. But thanks to his impeccable senses skill, he confirmed that it was indeed a player. He noticed an arrow pierced in Junseong's back, making him wonder if it was shot by Junseong's own doppelganger. He asked Junseong if he was alright, but Junseong told him to stop right there, making him stop in surprise. Junseong, in pain, then explained that although he didn't want to be suspicious of him, he had no way of telling who his doppelganger was, so they should maintain a safe distance. He pointed at the doppelganger that was slowly fading and told Junseong that the one he had just killed was a doppelganger. He then asked Junseong if that shouldn't be enough to verify who he was. Junseong thought for a moment, then lowered his arrow and acknowledged that he really was Hoyoung. As Junseong began to warn him to be careful of his doppelganger, he suddenly collapsed, causing Hoyoung to panic and rush to his aid. Moments later, as Hoyoung helped Junseong walk, Junseong apologized, expressing regret that if he hadn't let his doppelganger escape, others might not have died, and he felt he had caused everyone trouble. Tears welled up in Junseong's eyes as he angrily reflected on the horror of another being, identical to him, causing harm. Hoyoung reassured him that it wasn't his fault, they were all victims of the tower, and their focus should be on surviving. Suddenly, Hoyoung sensed something amiss. Yaesol and Junho approached them excitedly. Yaesol expressed relief that they were both safe and mentioned her worry upon hearing that players had died. Junho echoed her concerns, dismayed that 2 players had already died. As Yaesol offered to heal Junseong, Hoyoung, sensing danger, pushed Junseong away from them and warned that the 2 approaching were doppelgangers. Immediately, the doppelgangers revealed their true selves and rushed to attack. Hoyoung blocked Junho's attack, while Junho's doppelganger taunted him, asking if he still harbored resentment from the death mission and commented mockingly on his supposed magnanimity. Hoyoung saw Junseong struggling against Yaesol's doppelganger, who had volunteered to take on the other doppelganger. However, Hoyoung was puzzled why the doppelgangers, especially Yaesol's, which possessed her memories and knew of his strength, dared to confront him so boldly. Suddenly, he sensed imminent danger from behind. Fortunately, he jumped away just in time to dodge Yaesol's doppelganger. Junho's doppelganger then appeared behind him, and he managed to evade that attack as well. He turned mid-air, landing safely, but then an arrow flew close to his face. Unfortunately, he couldn't dodge in time, and the arrow, mingled with his blood, pierced the tree beside him. To his shock, he found it was Junseong who had attacked him, who teasingly remarked that he thought he had achieved checkmate. The 2 doppelgangers then walked toward Junseong, who stood next to him, smiling creepily. This reminded him of an earlier moment when he had killed Yongwoo's doppelgangers behind the tree and Junseong had watched his reaction, smiling in the same eerie way. Junseong then grabbed one of his arrows and stabbed it into his own shoulder. Junseong's background as a fisherman from Wanyang, who oddly had a hobby of human fishing, now seemed chillingly relevant. Back in the present, Junseong explained that he had spoken in dialect without realizing it, getting a little too excited. He then asked what kind of emotions he was feeling, betrayal, futility, or anger, while trying to contain his excitement. However, he stopped when he sighed, remarking that he had been wondering when Junseong would reveal his true nature, and now it seemed he was crazier than he thought. He told Junseong that it seemed like he had known he would be betrayed, revealing that he could see the status windows of others and had noticed Junseong's stats had significantly increased. He then bluntly called Junseong a murderous jerk, which took Junseong and the doppelgangers by surprise. Junseong replied that he truly became more interesting as time passed and asked if he had received the favor of the tower, confessing his jealousy. However, he dismissed the small talk and questioned why Junseong was doing this and if the desire for gold and stats was so strong that he would kill others. Junseong retorted, questioning why he needed a reason at all in a world where killing not only went unpunished but was rewarded. With a sinister smile, Junseong attacked him with arrows, shouting about the impossibility of not killing anyone. He had wondered if there was a situation that compelled Junseong to act this way, but it now seemed clear that Junseong was simply a murderous psychopath wearing a mask. As the doppelgangers rushed him and Junho's doppelganger tried to slash him, he dodged swiftly and appeared behind Junho, delivering a powerful kick. Suddenly, an arrow was shot at him, but he managed to slice it in half before it could hit him. Realizing Junseong was repeating his trick, he dodged a second, closer arrow, which then hit a tree instead. When he landed on the ground, he saw that the tree struck by Junseong's arrow now had a hole, and another slash across his face made him realize that Junseong had not yet shown all his cards. He peeked back when he heard footsteps behind him and saw Yaisol's doppelganger healing Junho's doppelganger. He knew that Junho was the best in close combat, Yaisol was the foremost healer in the area, and Junseong was the strongest ranged attacker among them, making their combination seemingly flawless. He told Junseong that he didn't know how he had convinced the doppelgangers, but it appeared he had prepared extensively. Junseong replied that to catch a big fish, one must go to great lengths, and added that he thought he would have taken him down more easily, but he proved to be quite resilient. Junseong then rolled an arrow in his hand, telling him that it was better this way. Junseong, behaving like a lunatic, licked the arrow's head and told him that he could take his time watching him struggle painfully until he died, but he remained silent. Junseong then notched his arrow to his bow, which magically multiplied and pointed them at him, while demanding to know what the doppelgangers were doing. Junseong released the arrows in his direction while shouting to the doppelgangers that it was time to raise their nets. The doppelgangers rushed toward him from behind, but he didn't move from his position and activated his impeccable senses skill. He knew that it was an exceptionally well-balanced party because Yaisol's doppelganger was level 7 with 20 stamina, 15 senses, and 10 in both strength and agility, while Junho's doppelganger was level 8 with 17 stamina, 18 strength, 14 agility, and 13 senses. However, even though his level was 2, his stamina, strength, and agility were 26, and his senses were 50. He then slashed Junho first with his sword, knowing that in the face of overwhelming strength, a good team composition means nothing. When Yaisol was about to heal Junho, he slashed her hand off and killed both doppelgangers with one last strike. The system then displayed that a doppelganger had died, ×2, and the remaining counts were 14 players and 11 doppelgangers. He walked closer to Junseong, who, in horror and confusion, kneeled on the ground, stopping him in surprise. Junseong tearfully begged for his life, admitting he had become obsessed with the rewards and had momentarily lost his sanity. He also confessed his impatience after seeing how formidable he was and acknowledged that he had crossed a line he should never have. As Junseong begged for mercy just this once, he suddenly put one leg up and tried to stab him with an arrow while shouting a curse. But he simply swung his sword, slicing Junseong's body in half. As Junseong's body floated in the air, his eyes opened in a final display of greed. He couldn't believe that Junseong was not just a slightly bigger catch. A few minutes later, he stood in stunned silence, gazing at his bloody sword, grappling with the reality that he had killed a living human. Suddenly, the system notification appeared, announcing that the player who had taken on the challenge of becoming the Star Killer had died, and he now had the chance to assume that role. He was then enveloped in a powerful pink smoke, and the system informed him that accepting the challenge would grant him a buff to his stats and the support of the doppelgangers. If he ultimately became the Star Killer, he would receive tremendous benefits. As the smoke coalesced into a form above him, he covered his face due to the force of the transformation. It then assumed a human shape, and a hand reached out to him. A lady monster stared at him while the system posed the question of whether he would like to take up the challenge. He realized this was how Junseong had been able to command the doppelgangers, and saw that the benefits of becoming the Star Killer included legendary rank equipment, a legendary skill, a rapid increase in stat points, and an exclusive Star Killer trait, making him wonder about the allure of these incredibly tempting benefits. He pondered for a moment. Although he disliked the idea of killing doppelgangers, he knew he could do so because they weren't human. However, he also understood that he would inevitably encounter situations where he had to fight humans, some of whom might be challengers aiming to become the Star Killer, or even the actual future Star Killer. As the lady monster smiled sweetly at him, offering incredible benefits, he decided to refuse the role, vowing not to become a deranged psychopath like Junseong. Moments later, he arrived where the other players were waiting. Seong, Yaisol, and Junho greeted him warmly, which both surprised and comforted him. Then, Seong teasingly asked why he was so late, causing him to grip his sword, half-jokingly wondering if maybe he should embrace becoming a psychopath. Yet, he managed to thank everyone for sticking to the plan, acknowledging how difficult it must have been to follow his lead, all the while thinking how close he had come to losing his temper with Seong. The man, surrounded by his doppelgangers, asks what they should do next and whether he was really able to identify which one was the doppelganger. He confirms that he can and is about to reveal more when someone thanks everyone for following his instructions. They then hear footsteps approaching. As he looks back, he sees his doppelganger approaching. Panicked, Byung-cheol shouts that there are two Hoyoungs, while Jeon asks which side they should trust. The lady then asks him if he had anticipated this situation as well, but he doesn't answer, merely staring at his smiling doppelganger. He realizes that the situation has become complicated and recalls that his intention had been to kill his doppelganger before this encounter could occur, but his plan was thwarted by an unexpected variable known as Junseong. He now sees it as a chess match between himself and his doppelganger. Ichial tells him that since he doesn't know who the real one is, he should explain the current situation and confirm if he indeed killed the doppelgangers as he had claimed. Ichial then asks him to identify the deceased doppelgangers. After a moment of silence, he realizes that with a total of 8 people, each having either a dead doppelganger or a dead player, revealing the 5 doppelgangers he killed would allow them to deduce their identities, thereby proving his authenticity as a player. He speaks up, and simultaneously, his doppelganger does too. He names the dead doppelgangers as Seong, Junseong, Yongwoo, Yaisol, and Junho, while his doppelganger names Jeon, Byung-cheol, Yaisol, and Junho, leaving everyone in shock. Frustrated by the turn of events, his doppelganger then urges everyone to think carefully, pointing out that Seong and Yaisol, who had been at his party on the first floor, had built a significant amount of trust with him. He reveals that he found and killed their doppelgangers first. His doppelganger then poses a question about the likelihood of such an occurrence, taking everyone by surprise with his proactive stance. Ichial asks if it was a trick for him to put himself into an advantageous position. Yoonjin responds, questioning if it isn't too obvious. However, Yaisol tells everyone that there's no guarantee that it wasn't possible. They then turn their attention to Hoyoung's thinking, and his doppelgangers point at Junseong's doppelganger, telling them that if the imposter's claims are correct, then the Junseong over there would be the doppelganger, which means Hoyoung killed the real Junseong himself. His doppelganger then asks what kind of person Junseong is and tells them that Junseong is the highest level among them, the real leader who gives them courage whenever times are tough. His doppelganger then points at him, saying that not only is it unimaginable that someone like Junseong could die, but even if that is the real Hoyoung, they must consider whether they can trust a murderer, which shakes everyone to the core. His doppelganger admits ignorance about how the real Junseong died but thinks the momentum's on his side. The only thing left to do, his doppelganger says, is to solidify his position. He accuses him of confessing too impatiently in his eagerness to win people over, calling him a doppelganger confidently, which takes him by surprise. The players then draw their swords, while Yoonjin shouts to everyone that there is nothing more to discuss, and they should defeat the imposter and eliminate the rest of the doppelgangers. However, Seong urges everyone not to act rashly, as that would imply he too was a fake. Yaisol then shouts that they shouldn't jump to conclusions after hearing just one side of the story. Junho agrees, emphasizing the need for caution, but another voice argues that there is no time for that because a huge disaster is imminent. Amidst the arguing, he remains silent, reflecting on the irony that praising the doppelganger is akin to praising himself, and acknowledges it as the best move given the current circumstances. He then approaches the side, admits to killing Junseong, and when his doppelganger asks if he has given up, he replies that it was disappointing but there's something even his doppelganger doesn't know. He then makes his move, gripping his sword tightly, slamming his attack onto the board as he swings forward, shouting that he killed Junseong because he was a traitor, a fact unknown to his doppelgangers. His doppelganger demands to know what he thinks he's doing and accuses him of acting recklessly. However, their exchange is interrupted when Junho tells everyone to wait and questions what Junseong means by calling him a traitor. Jinho, deep in thought, realizes that if his suspicions are correct, the one who slashed Junseong is the real Hoyoung. The fact that Hoyoung has gathered everyone in one place suggests that he has created a situation where the players have the upper hand. This is because when a doppelganger kills someone, their true nature is revealed immediately, preventing them from killing recklessly. If Hoyoung can identify his doppelganger, he can prove his identity by killing the imposter. But Hoyoung's claim that Junseong is a traitor raises questions. Jinho then asks Hoyoung if he kills humans, to which Hoyoung replies yes, explaining that Junseong was a demon disguised as a good person. hiding his true nature and biding his time. Yunjin, trembling with anger, confronted Hoyoung, demanding to know how he dared to insult Junseong. She remembered how Junseong had saved her from a monster and couldn't forgive Hoyoung's accusations. She launched her sword at him, declaring she wouldn't forgive him. But then, she felt something pierce her back. She turned to see an arrow lodged there, fired by Junseong, before collapsing. The system then shows that a player has died, reducing the current number of players to 12, with 11 doppelgangers remaining. Frustrated, Jinho curses, unable to believe that Junseong's doppelganger had enough strength left to move. Junseong's doppelganger laughs and shouts that this is the reaction he wanted to see. Suddenly, someone throws an object at Junseong, killing him, and the system updates to show that there are now 10 doppelgangers left. Secheng apologizes to Hoyoung for doubting him and asks what they should do next, surprising him. The players are also shocked to learn that Junseong was truly a doppelganger and start figuring out who the real Hoyoung is. As they confront their own doppelgangers, they look to Hoyoung for guidance, promising to follow his lead. This gives him a sense of deja vu, but he quickly composes himself and announces his final plan. Just then, his doppelganger launches a surprise attack, declaring that it's all or nothing now. Fortunately, Hoyoung blocks the attack and tells everyone to loot all the gold they have and use it to raise their stats. The players follow his instructions, successfully killing their doppelgangers. Hoyoung realizes that the doppelgangers are no longer a match for them because everyone has become stronger than they were yesterday. A moment later, they were back in the safe zone. He knew that since the doppelgangers' stats matched theirs when they first entered the second floor, they could clear the mission without further casualties now that they had raised their stats with gold. However, he noticed Secheng looking dejected and heard him say, "If it wasn't for that bastard Junseong, we would have survived without anyone dying." He understood that Secheng was probably the most disappointed, having been in the same party as Junseong, and felt let down because his goal was to clear the second floor safely without any deaths. He also realized that the situation in other regions was likely worse than theirs because they didn't have someone like him with a guide to read. There would be someone else who took on the path of the Star Killer. He knew that the fights ahead would probably get more intense. Though he still felt weak, he was certain there was a good reason he had the special ability to read the guide. He was confident because, despite the challenges, he had people who trusted him, and he would do his best to save as many as possible. He was then surprised to see Secheng standing in front of him, thanking him for helping him survive. He replied that it was thanks to everyone following his plan. Secheng then pointed out that the fact he was still at level 2 despite contributing the most meant he had been given a special ability in return for slowed leveling, which surprised him. He realized that Secheng's cautiousness and decision-making abilities were impressive, making him a valuable ally for the future. Secheng bowed and sincerely apologized for doubting and underestimating him. The other players also apologized, but he told them it wasn't necessary. Then, Seong laughingly remarked that they had been so bad at recognizing true potential, and should have been like him, getting on the Hoyoung Express train. Yaisol reminded Seong that she was the first to discover how extraordinary Hoyoung was, while Jinho was crying and apologizing again, this time with tears. Secheng then told him that he knew it might sound shameless after everything that had happened, but he wanted him to lead them from now on. This surprised him, but he smiled and agreed. 5 minutes before clearing the mission, the system showed them that there were 12 players and 1 doppelganger left, making everyone panic, thinking they had killed all the doppelgangers. They looked around for the last one, but he walked away silently and stopped near a bush. He stared at the doppelganger hiding there and then stabbed Secheng's doppelganger, which cleared the mission. A moment later, the announcer declared that rewards were calculated based on contribution. The players were excited about receiving gold. Seong laughed proudly, flexing his muscles and shouting that he had been rewarded with 2,000 gold. While Seong boasted about his reward, Hoyoung smiled silently, glad that everyone managed to get some gold by following his plan. He was even happier with his own reward of 12,500 gold. However, he was surprised when another system notification appeared, showing that because he had obtained more than 10,000 gold, his shop's rank would be increased. He then managed to open the magic items section in the store and realized how the system worked. If he wanted to buy rare or higher level items, he needed to increase the rank of his shop. Knowing what he needed, he clicked on something in the store. The system showed that he had purchased a skill upgrade to level 3, which cost 5,000 gold, and his level 2 basic swordsmanship had leveled up. He remembered that he had unknowingly used a higher level of swordsmanship before, but had fainted afterward. Thinking that being able to use such swordsmanship for just 5,000 gold was a cheap price to pay, he was satisfied with his shopping. He then shared 1,500 gold with Yaisol, who was surprised and stutteringly asked why he suddenly gave her the gold. He replied that she deserved it, explaining that their fights against the kobolds and doppelgangers would have been much harder without her. He told her that in a place where survival often meant taking others' lives, their ability to laugh and rely on each other was thanks to her. Ysol was taken aback by his words and tightly closed her mouth in thought. Then, calling his name seriously, she swore to him that she would become stronger. Her healing hand skill then increased to level 2. He then shared 200 gold with the flexing Seong, causing Seong to call his name in confusion. He told him to stop doing weird stuff and to keep up the good work. He thought that since Seong was quite competent, he might be pretty useful if he helped him become stronger. However, he also decided that it was always better not to have annoying people on his bad side. Seong then called him, making him turn back, and Seong sweetly said that his wish was his command from now on, so he should just tell him what he needed. Grabbing his sword tightly, he thought that the time to test his level 3 basic swordsmanship had come. Later, they entered the 3rd floor's mission, which was a siege war mission. The system explained that they would be meeting players from other regions for the first time, and their group's mission was to attack, bring down the castle, and occupy the altar. Their remaining time was 24 hours, and the penalty for failing the mission was unknown. He then obtained a time-limited item called the Return Crystal, which was only usable on the 3rd floor, leaving him confused. Yichiao wondered if it meant they needed to kill people, and a lady asked what the Return Crystal was, making him realize its significance. He then called Seong, who happily responded. Swinging his sword, he asked Seong if he was serious when he said he'd do anything he asked, surprising Seong. A moment later, Seong was climbing the mountain alone, trying his best not to get tired. He thought Hoyoung was being too harsh, wondering why Hoyoung couldn't just tell him that he wouldn't die for real even if he got killed there. He held his neck, unaware that the guide had shown Hoyoung that on that floor, the return crystal would return him to the starting location upon death. A moment later, Seong arrived at the gate and remembered Hoyoung saying that if he did reconnaissance for them, he'd get 100 gold. Seong then launched his fist, shouting that he'd destroy everything while he was there. His punch dropped the gate's durability by 81%. Seong continued punching the gate until, with his final punch, he shattered it into pieces. The system notified him that the castle gate was open, but would reset in 2 seconds. Walking inside, he laughed and proudly declared that no mere castle gate could withstand his power. Seong was surprised to see the gate being restored behind him. Looking up, he saw 2 guards on top of the castle wall and, peeking to the side, noticed about 10 people in the center, making him wonder if that was the altar. Seong remembered Hoyoung telling him not to kill anyone there because they'd realized the purpose of the return crystal. However, Seong smiled, thinking that although Hoyoung asked him not to, these people were just trash scared of him, a single person. As Seong ran toward them, deciding to destroy them all, something flew at his head and hit him, pushing him back. Coughing up blood, he was shocked and knelt on the ground, wondering what had happened. He looked up to see people walking toward him, with a lady in the center holding a gun. She shot him again. Later, Hoyoung was surprised when Seong described the gun, which fired some kind of magic bullet that hurt like hell. He thought it was crazy because a gun shouldn't be a weapon obtainable at this stage. Even Secheng, whose class is a soldier, didn't have a gun as a weapon. He considered the possibility of a star killer, realizing it would be a tough fight. Ysol grabbed his arm, turned him toward her, and told him not to worry because she had his back. Junho then shouted that he was prepared too, and Seong yelled at the gunner that she was dead meat. The other players also shouted their readiness. Surprised, Hoyoung smiled at them. He praised them and said he would now share their plan. Meanwhile, in the castle, tears poured onto the floor from a man sweating and struggling, while a lady sat on him, yawning peacefully. The people on the ground around them shook in fear. He then used his impeccable senses, which he gained during the 2nd floor's mission, and his vision zoomed in on the 2 guards. He saw that they were level 8 Lee Demon and level 8 Ju Hongdiok. Seong proudly called out to the guards, taunting them and calling them assholes. Ysol asked him if the enemy would figure out the return crystals if Seong went back out there. He replied no, explaining that they might suspect, but they wouldn't be certain. There was a higher chance they'd think it was something only Seong could do. The 2 men then aimed their arrows at them, and Seong immediately ran away. When the men released their arrows, they headed straight for Seong, who was shocked and shouted that it was totally different from what happened before. Fortunately, the arrows were cut in half just in time. Hoyoung told Seong that because of this, they had an opportunity. He then landed on Seong's shoulder and used it as a springboard to jump towards the guards. Launching his sword, he slashed at the men, saying they had the opportunity because of just one change. Jinho realized that the enemies would eventually figure out how to use the return crystal due to the failed attack during the first turn, so they needed to defeat them swiftly this time around. Seong loudly praised him and then shouted to the others that it was their chance and that they should charge. He proudly told everyone that he could destroy the gate with just 5 of his stone fists, and urged them to follow closely behind him, otherwise, the gate would close if they were too slow. Seong then launched his fist at the gate, but before he could hit it, an attack from inside struck his face and opened the gate in just one blow. The system also showed that the gate could no longer be restored while Yisol healed Seong, who had collapsed from the attack. Watching from above, Hoyoung was surprised. Hongdeok laughed and told him that his half-hearted mindset would cost him his life because the mad woman would take advantage of it. Hoyoung knew this was a possibility. When he checked the status of the woman named Sun Seoyin, he saw that she was indeed a star killer with a combat swordsman class, level 13, and skills including level 3 magic bullet and Eye of the Killer Star. He looked at her from above, wondering if she had slaughtered everyone on the second floor. Then, she looked up at him and pointed the gun in his direction. He was hit in the shoulder by her shot. He immediately hid and drank a potion, unable to believe Seoyin would shoot at him from such a distance. He realized she was more hostile than he had thought, not hesitating at all. He was glad he had prepared in advance, looking at his Kalia's leather armor, which was of advanced grade and had a 50% boost to magic defense. Peeking back at her, he noted that each magic bullet consumed 10 mana points, and if she used the same shop rank as him, she shouldn't be able to purchase mana recovery items yet. He then jumped off and landed in front of Seoyin, knowing she only had 13 more magic bullets and that they had to break through. The players rushed towards Seoyin. She gathered another bullet and shot at a man, but before it hit, the man asked how they would get past the bullets to the altar. Secheng replied that they'd use cover and advance in a zigzag manner. He told them that Seoyin wouldn't be able to use bullets powerful enough to critically damage Seong indefinitely, and since they were called magic bullets, they probably consumed mana points. Junho added that the number of mana points Seoyin had would be crucial. He agreed and told them to take just one bullet each. The man who got hit smiled while being healed, and they continued their attack. Seoyin kept firing, but the players were continuously healed by Yisol. Hoyoung assured them that if they got hit by one bullet, they shouldn't be afraid since they had Yisol. Noticing this, Seoyin kicked the man she had been sitting on and ordered the others to go, and the scared players followed. Hoyoung then ran toward them, knowing that what happened next would decide how things ended. If a fight broke out, teammates would die from the magic bullets, so they needed to reach the altar as quickly as possible. One of the players launched a sword at him, but he easily dodged it and kicked the man in the stomach. Another man tried to stab him from behind, but he managed to evade and hit the man on the back of the neck with his sword handle. Suddenly, a bullet flew close to his face, but Junho blocked it with his sword just in time. The force of the shot made Junho drop his sword, and Seoyin couldn't believe they had reacted to her shots. Junho shouted for him to go quickly before getting shot in the head. Hoyoung furiously called Junho's name. He then saw Yisol shaking with exhaustion while trying to heal everyone, noticing that more and more people were dying. He figured Seoyin definitely knew they'd return even after death, but he wondered how she could smile while killing people. Seeing her smile, she told him that his group was pretty interesting, making him snap in anger and draw his sword. Using his level 3 swordsmanship, he quickly slashed the players trying to block his way to the altar. Near the stairs, he positioned himself and jumped, launching his sword at her. She points her gun at him too, their attacks colliding in the center and causing a strong explosion. On the other hand, Seong taunted the enemy, saying they were screwed now that his big brother Hoyoung had reached the altar. He declared they no longer needed to hold back. Seong then launched his fist and used his level 2 stone fist to attack the men while Hoyoung and Seoyin pointed their weapons at each other. She asked him how he was so strong at level 2, but he retorted by asking if it wasn't more strange for her to be at level 13 that early, making her glare at him. He then stepped inside the altar, and light spread from the part he stepped onto other parts of the altar. The system then showed him that he had occupied 1/3 of the altar and instructed him to remove the opposing player from the altar. He understood that they needed 3 people to completely occupy the altar. She clicked the trigger on her gun and shot at him, but he dodged it and knew he needed to get rid of her. He launched his sword at her with speed. Unfortunately, she blocked his attack with her gun, but he continuously attacked, and she continuously blocked, wondering how he was able to react to her shots. She saw him launching a strong attack and immediately jumped into the air to dodge it. She then aimed at him and shot twice, but was surprised and couldn't believe that he easily dodged them, making her wonder if he had predicted it. He simply smiled at her. Hoyoung knew that a swordsman like him, one of the strongest players in their area, Seo Junho, was called a genius table tennis player. In matches between pros, where rallies take place, it wasn't easy to return every ball just by using one's eyes. At higher levels, players read their opponent's postures and gazes to predict where the ball would come from, a skill considered exceptional. Junho's nickname as a pro table tennis player was the genius of prediction, and it was thanks to this skill that he dodged her shots. He then dodged her shots while getting closer to her, shocking her. He swung his sword wide, slashing a pillar behind her, causing it to fall. She blocked the attack with her gun, only getting a small scratch on her face. Suoyan realized he had higher stats than her. Just then, Seong, Yaisal, and Secheng walked closer, telling him they were done over there and they should end it quickly before the enemies returned. This surprised Suoyan, and she asked if the function of the return crystal was revival. He replied yes and told her it was useless for her to know about it. He knew that even if she had a hidden skill allowing her to get one strike in, he could withstand that hit. He just needed to take the risk and end it now. But then he was confused when she asked if he thought he had won. He saw her use her gold to level her firing skill to level 4, making him curse in panic. She opened her eyes, which turned red, and shot him multiple times, hitting him. His teammates panicked and rushed to him before he disappeared. But the system showed that the third floor's mission had ended. A moment later, he saw Seong looking depressed and asked why he had that face when they had won. Seong grumbled that he carried that round, but the gold reward was so small. This made him smile, remembering that while he didn't expect the consecutive shots at the end, he managed to stab Sun Suoyan with his sword at the same time. She swore she would remember his name. After that, the three of them occupied the altar and they won, but he hoped he wouldn't meet Suoyan again because she gave him the shivers. Then he heard Yaisal call his name and looked behind him. He saw a portal glass showing the players they fought on the other side. When monsters emerged from their enemy's safe zone, the system showed that the defeated group would face disaster, targeting players who did not get a single kill. The players ran away in panic, and a man banged on the portal glass, begging for help. Yaisal approached the portal glass, stutteringly saying they needed to help them. But when she tried to grab the man inside, she got electrocuted. She looked away as the disaster monster began killing the players, shocking everyone. They couldn't believe what they were witnessing. When everyone was dead, the man from before tried to reach for help, but the monster just squeezed him to death, driving Hoyoung to anger. The announcer then stated that only one player in the C1427 area had survived and the group had been reorganized. He wondered what it meant and then remembered that the only person who managed to kill in the enemy group was Suoyan. Someone walked closer and they all became angry when they saw it was Suoyan, who emotionlessly wiped the blood from her face and said it was filthy. He cursed in rage, realizing that this was why he had felt uneasy just now. Later, they arrived at a destroyed city, and one of them asked if it was the 4th floor abandoned city. The system then showed them that 6 hours from now, a disaster would descend upon the cursed city. They were instructed to kill all monsters that appeared throughout the city and secure the escape portal. The system explained that the escape portal would appear randomly as they hunted the monsters and that only 20 portals would appear. However, they could not allow others to use their portal, which surprised Hoyoung. The countdown began. The players were excited about finally having a monster hunting mission. After going through the 2nd and 3rd floors, they were actually happy to fight some monsters. With 20 portals and only 13 people, they believed there was no need to compete with each other. Seong flexed his muscles and shouted excitedly that he would kill all the monsters and encourage them to level up like crazy. But then Yaisal pointed out that since they couldn't allow others to use their portal, there might be a limit to the monsters that appear. Jinho agreed, noting that if one person opened multiple portals, some people wouldn't be able to escape. The extra portals could be a trap set by the tower. Secheng added that no matter how many monsters they killed, it made sense to enter the portal once it opened. Jinho then shouted that they should promise each other that the moment they found a portal, they would stop hunting and escape immediately, which the others agreed to. However, Seong looked away, which Yaisal noticed and asked him about. Seong panicked and asked what about his face, insisting it was just how he looked. Hoyoung silently smiled at them, thinking that after coming this far together, it seemed everyone understood what needed to be done for a mission. It made him feel like they had finally become a team. He then looked at her, knowing the problem would be Sun Suoyan. After explaining the plan to her, she simply asked why she should follow it and walked away, warning him not to think about giving her orders or she'd kill him. His teammates and he furiously stared at Suoyan, wondering if they should just gang up on her. 12 hours ago, Seong shouted at Suoyan, telling her that she had no right to act superior, and that without her gun, she was useless trash. In response, she punched him in the face, causing him to cough up blood, and then slammed him to the ground. Everyone was shocked and couldn't believe it. She then asked Seong if he thought he really had multiple lives and called him trash. He reminded her that she was in their territory and that she should stop messing around. He thought to himself that he had gone through all that to kill a potential star killer, but never expected a real star killer to appear. He noticed that she was good at fighting even without her gun. She walked closer to him and said they met again, but he simply asked if she had something to say, noting that they weren't in a situation to exchange greetings politely. Suddenly, he saw a target mark on his head and immediately jumped away from her, wondering what it was. The system then informed him that the star killer had designated him as her main target. He was shocked and confused, wondering what was happening. The system provided him with a guide, and he was even more shocked when he saw it. He looked at her, but she had already turned around and left. Back in the abandoned city, Seong apologized to the orc for hitting its handsome face before punching it, shouting for it to just quietly become his experience. The orc was pushed back, wondering why a fellow orc would hit him. After Seong killed the orc, a portal appeared, surprising him because he had only killed a few monsters. Seong thought for a moment and peeked behind him. He walked to the side, smiling, but was shocked in horror when he saw Hoyoung. Seong asked Hoyoung what he was doing there, but Hoyoung just asked why Seong was so shocked and if he had done something wrong. Seong replied that he thought Hoyoung would have opened a portal already, but Hoyoung just asked if it was true that Seong had opened a portal. This made Seong angry, thinking Hoyoung was a quick-witted, hateful brat. Hoyoung told Seong to stop bullshitting and then kicked him inside the portal. Hoyoung sighed, confirming his suspicion that Seong would try to pull something. He knew he had taken care of one problem and recalled the guide showing him that the traits of a star killer would completely unlock on the Day of Blood. On that day, if someone was killed by the star killer would obtain a very good reward. He needed to prepare as much as possible for the Day of Blood. He then started running, thinking that he didn't know when the Day of Blood would take place, but there was a high chance it would be advantageous for the star killer and many people would definitely die. A level 10 orc rushed at him, but he easily slashed its neck along with its sword, gaining experience points. He knew he needed to become as strong as possible before that day. He then saw that killing the orc didn't open a portal for him. He thought that even though he could kill all the monsters on that floor if he had enough time, he couldn't do that since not everyone had escaped yet. He also knew he needed to be careful of Seoyan, who was somewhere killing monsters, making him wonder how he should proceed. Suddenly, he smelled a strong, dirty odor and wondered what that rotting stench was. The guide then showed him that although all orcs have a stench, those that leave a portal behind stink much more than the rest. He looked back and identified the orc that was the source, but the orc just looked at him, confused. He then rushed at it and slashed it in half. A portal appeared, making him smile and think that it was great.